So I hope you all saw it, but the EPA posted a bulletin for open comment period about lorsban, or chlorpyrifos. And this ended in early January, and they're opening it for comment because they are proposing to pool this chemical from all of fruit production. So lorsban, anybody know what we use it for? Borers, right. It's pretty much our only chemical, our only insecticide option for borers at this point. And it's being proposed to be pulled from all markets as of now. They're still going through all the comment period to make a final determination, but we can expect that it will be pulled from the market sometime in the near future. We just don't know when that will be as of right now. So just a little bit of history. When the Food Quality Protection Act came out in 1996, this caused the review of a lot of our broad spectrum materials like our organophosphates and carbamates. Lorsban, of course, is an organophosphate. And so the general safety, both environmental safety and worker safety issues were reviewed for these chemicals, and they've been selectively removing chemicals from the market since then. Like our most recent loss was Thionex, or Thiodan, from the market. So lorsban came up for comment here in the fall of 2015, and we're expecting a response by midsummer this year. But they have said that it is highly likely that all tolerances for chlorpyrifos on food crops will be revoked by mid-2016. Now, as it stands right now, we are only using chlorpyrifos primarily when pre-bloom or post-bloom, or post-harvest, which is when we do our borer applications. So we know, the USDA responded and researchers responded that this is a very valuable tool, and in non-citrus fruit trees east of the Mississippi, this is our primary management tool for tree boring or wood boring insects, such as dogwood borer, American plum borer, ambrosia beetles, such as black stem borer, which we're starting to get little pockets of populations here and there throughout the state. And then in stone fruit, we tend to have problems mostly with lesser peach tree borer and peach tree borer. So lesser peach tree borer, I'm going to talk about the three main borers: lesser peach tree borer, and dogwood borer. Lesser peach tree borer is the one that's attacking up at the scaffolding limbs of peach trees. Even though the name would suggest it's lower, lesser is actually up higher. It's a clear-winged moth, so it looks more like a wasp than it does a moth. It has no scales on its wings, so the wings are clear. And I'm telling you this because if you're either have a pheromone trap for monitoring, you'll be catching the males here, or these are also daytime flyers. So unlike our other moths that we're familiar with in our pest management, such as codling moth or Oriental fruit moth, or even some OBLR, these are daytime flyers. They're pretty large, they're about 1/2 inch, so they're conspicuous, and they'll be resting on the leaves inside the orchard, and you may see them as you're walking through the farm. They're kind of a metallic blue, and they have yellow or white stripes on the abdomen. This is what we call an indirect pest, because it's not actually attacking the fruit, but it's attacking the wood or the cambium of the tree. Primarily, lesser is attacking at wounding sites, or it's also associated with canker. And injury can weaken scaffolding limbs and the upper trunk of the trees. Down at Rarick at the research station in South Jersey, when we have one of those big summer derechos, and we don't control this pest, we'll lose an entire scaffolding limb from peach tree borer. Our populations are rather high, though, because we're not generally controlling it. They overwinter as larvae inside the bark. This is what the injury will look like. So you'll see this kind of gummy brown material that's kind of pebbly. That's the insect poop, or frass, mixed with the gum from the tree. It can turn black with mold. And occasionally, if you get it at the right time, you'll see the pupae, or the pupal case, sticking out of it. They're about yay big and kind of amber colored, and those would be close to these wounding sites that you can see them. The Larvae are the ones that are causing the damage, and they're feeding underneath the bark, and that's where they're also overwintering. Lesser peachtree borer, we have 2 generations per year in New Jersey, and they will, during the winter, they're going to kind of go into a senescent state where they're hibernating, and they'll resume feeding around pink to shuck fall, shuck split, and we'll start to see adult flight in our pheromone traps around shuck split, and then again we see a large peak of adult activity from July to August when they start to mate, and then they'll lay eggs again and the larvae will start to develop. So we have 2 generations per year for lesser peachtree borer. Peachtree borer, or greater peachtree borer, depending on who you talk to, is another Synanthidone species. It's also a clear-winged metallic moth. It looks very similar, at least the males look very similar to lesser peachtree borer. And unlike lesser, these can establish in healthy trees, but these are going to establish at the roots, closer to the soil surface, and they don't need a wound in order to lay their eggs. So they will lay their eggs in a healthy tree. As with lesser peachtree borer, we see a lot of decline in tree vigor and reduced yields over time. Peachtree borer can kill the tree over time. If you have a young planting, it's very important to protect your trees from peachtree borer because they can attack and kill a tree within a couple years. So before you can even get productivity out of it. And they do that by girdling the roots and the trunk of the tree because the larvae are feeding on the roots and right underneath the cambium of the tree. If they're feeding on an older tree, the trees are a bit more able to sustain feeding injury, but it will weaken the tree over time if not treated. So this is the culprit here, the larval stage, and this is what we see if we're doing our assessments. This is a pupal case, so it's kind of rolled itself in dirt. Here's some of the pupae that we can see, and there's one of the emerged pupal cases. So we're looking for these if we're doing an assessment right at the soil surface because they'll come up to the soil surface to pupate, and then again, they will, once they molt to the adult stage, they're also daytime flyers, and they're pretty conspicuous in the orchard if they're there. Dogwood borer is also a wasp mimic. It has a bit more of the yellow coloration on it. And this one has a much wider host range than the peachtree borers. It will attack both apples and plums, as well as a lot of wild hosts, which you most likely have in the wood edge, including dogwood, since it's called dogwood borer. Here we also seem to have about two generations. Sorry, we have 1 generation, but 2 flight peaks, mid to late May, and then a second peak, July to August. Some of these insects take about 2 years to develop. Some of them develop much faster. So again, these eggs are laid in wounds or knots, so similar to lesser peachtree borer. And then the larvae, again, are causing the injury, and they're forming galleries under the trunk where they're feeding. For dogwood borer, we get tree decline and reduced yield. So our current management right now, we have a lot of management recommendations. We've recommended mating disruption, but the current management is a trunk spray with chlorpyrifos or Lorsban post-harvest, especially for peachtree borer and dogwood borer. And that's usually done with a handgun application. It's not an easy process. It's time-consuming and smells kind of bad. But we need to start looking at alternatives. If you have a problem with borer pests based on pheromone trap catches, and you have Lorsban product, if we're able, we'll let you know if you're able to use that material this year. We haven't heard any rulings from the EPA yet about that. But we do have a couple other options. The main one is mating disruption. So mating disruption is where we saturate the orchard with the female pheromone, and the males get confused. So they can't, as they're flying around trying to find a female to mate with, they can't locate that female. Think of it as being in a room full of perfume and you can't find that one person that's wearing it. And so the males get frustrated and they don't actually get to mate with the females. So it works really well for a lot of our moth pests. There's a couple downsides to it. Because we're modifying the insect behavior, we're not actually applying any chemicals. which is beneficial to the whole system, but it doesn't prevent mated females coming in from a neighboring orchard or from the wood edge. So we always seem to have higher damage around the wood edge or the edge of the orchard. So mating disruption works best if we all work together on it. And so if you're going to do this on your farm, it's better to do it in large acres. You need to do it a minimum of 5 acres is the recommendation for any mating disruption product. And the bigger area you go, the higher likelihood that this will be a successful tactic. So what happens is if you have unmated females, they're not going to lay any eggs, you don't get any injury. Now, if you're monitoring for the borer pests within the orchard, you will see, with the pyramid pheromone traps, you will see trap numbers decline over time. And this is because you're effectively shutting down the population and the males aren't responding to the pheromone. So over time, you can actually use less dispensers than you do initially because you're reducing the population at a large scale. So one of the main products that we have for peach tree borer works against both lesser peach tree borer and peach tree borer, which is really nice because they're occupying different levels of the tree and require a different timing with insecticides applications. So this is an isomate product. It's called PTB Dual, produced by Pacific Biocontrol or CBC America. It does provide season-long disruption, but you need to put it out before first flight. And first flight is going to be in mid-May. So you would need to put it out pretty early on in the season. The rate is 150 to 200 ties per acre. So each mating disruption is a dispenser, the red kind of tubes, and one of those, 150 of those per acre. It may seem like a lot, but it's over time you can decrease that, and you want to hang those at chest high. So you want to hang those at the bottom of this, lower of the scaffolding limbs. Now, the placement of the dispensers varies depending on the moth species. So for codling moth, you may have heard us say you need to put those up at the tops of the trees. That's because that's where they're mating. For oriental fruit moth, it works so well we can put it anywhere in the canopy. Our borer pests, you want to put it right at chest height or at the bottom of the scaffolding limbs, unless they're really low to the ground. Don't do that. And again, these are daytime flyers. So we also have isomate dogwood borer in apple, and there's a couple other dogwood borer products out there as well. The key thing here is that you want to deploy your dispensers evenly throughout the orchard, so you're not putting 150 just right around the edge, right? You're putting them throughout the orchard because you want to create an even kind of coat of pheromone throughout the orchard. So some of the data from CBC, from Greg Stamm, shows that under low pressure versus high pressure blocks, this is data I think that was from New Jersey, you can see that the number of peach tree borers, this is lessers, declines over time. This is an effect we often see with mating disruption, that our populations and injury declines over time. So it's effective both under high and low pressure. It's going to be more effective under low pressure. Another way to do this is to combine it with a Lorsban trunks treatment the first year, so that you're killing the larvae that are inside the trees and then disrupting the adults from mating as well. So you're attacking both life stages. When they looked at peach tree borer or greater peach tree borer at the soil surface, they saw a similar effect. It didn't work. I think these are, okay, so under low pressure, this was not treated at all with Lorsban and just relied on mating disruption. And under the higher pressure block, they did do Lorsban in the first year. So again, we can get efficacy against both of our borer pests with the isomate product. Now, some data from West Virginia University shows that even in small blocks that are less than 5 acres, mating disruption was effective. So they did this at commercial orchards in West Virginia. They used a post-harvest application of Lorsban, and then they applied PTB Dual for prior to lesser peach tree borer emergence, and then they monitored every week for pheromone traps. This is the layout here in West Virginia. So the red are the Lorsban blocks, and then they had 3 different acres that were 3 different plots that were disrupted. So you can see the size ranges from even 2.25 acres So for this product, it seems like we can go under the small acre size. Here's just the moth capture, so you see a general idea of what's going on. We can see different flight patterns for peach tree borer versus lesser peach tree borer. Lesser, again, has 2 generations per year, whereas peach tree borer has 1. The key thing here is that lesser is flying earlier, and so we need to put dispensers out in the orchard before that first flight in early May. When we look at the damage here on the 2 different assessment dates, they did a spring assessment and a fall assessment. You can see that the mating disruption at the 3 different blocks was less in terms of infestation than the Lorsban blocks. So this looks to be effective in West Virginia. We also have some data in New Jersey that I had showed you previously that shows that this is an effective method of treatment. And once you hang the dispensers, you don't have to do anything else to them in the orchard. And they're pretty easy to go on now because they're just two pieces of plastic that are stuck together. You just open it up and throw it on the tree. Well, maybe not throw, just kind of gently place. Make sure it's on there. The other alternative to Lorsban that you may have heard me talk about before is entomopathogenic nematodes. Now, this is a biological organism. They are naturally occurring worms in the soil. And the idea is that we can boost their populations and provide biological control of our pests that are in the ground, of our larvae. This is commonly used for Japanese beetles or white grubs in turf grass, but we've started to use it more for our orchard pests as well. And the nice thing is that there's almost no negative effect of these, and you don't need any special application equipment to apply them. I've applied these from the back of a truck using a truck-mounted handgun sprayer with just wearing gloves. So much less smelly than Lorsban. So these are commercially available through a couple different companies as bioinsecticides. Some of them have organic labeling as well, if that is, if you have an organic farm. They are exempt from EPA regulation because they're a naturally occurring organism. So the way they work is that we have infective juveniles, or the nematode stage, in the soil. They find a host, preferably a caterpillar or a grub or like these borer larvae, and they enter the host. They release a bacteria to kill it. They have multiple generations. You get a couple nematodes in, you get 100,000 that come out. And so then this continues to cycle over time, and if they can persist in the soil, this is a really good biological control agent. So we've done work on this here in New Jersey, in South Jersey, and then one of my colleagues in Georgia has also done this. He does a lot of work with this, and in fact, he'll be at the Rarick Field Day that we're having at the end of June, and he'll be demonstrating this Barricade fire gel. Does anybody know what Barricade is? Have you heard of that? So Barricade fire gel is exactly what it sounds like. It's a gel that they put on houses during forest fires to prevent them from burning. And this first started by, they put the nematodes in a diaper because the diapers have a lot of gel in them, and then they put the diapers on the tree. So the nematodes, because they're biological organisms, they're very susceptible to drying out. So the idea is that this Barricade gel, it's a gel, so it has higher moisture content, and so it's going to increase the survivability of these nematodes. Now, this is especially important when we're targeting lesser peach tree borer because it's up higher in the canopy. So David tried Steinernema carpocapsae, or SC, with 2 different rates of fire gel, and compared that to chlorpyrifos. So what he found is that relative to the control, the nematode alone didn't have any effect against lesser peach tree borer, and that's because you're spraying it up in the tree and basically they're just washing off. Okay? However, when they incorporate the nematodes into this Barricade gel, we can get efficacy that's similar, that's equal to Lorsban as well. And the same thing again with percent control. So even at the really low rate of 2% of this fire gel, we can have equal control with the nematodes as Lorsban. And that's for lesser peach tree borer. So in South Jersey, we've tried the nematodes, again, a commercial strain of Steinernema carpocapsae, with peaches against peach tree borer. And this involves going around underneath the trees. Dean has done it with me, looking for those little exuvia that are poking out of the trees, out of the soil. It's not a very fun activity, but we applied this at the same time. We applied the nematodes with just a handgun sprayer from the back of the truck at the same time that the grower applied Lorsban treatments. So what we can see, this is the difference in number of peach tree borers that we found initially and then after treatment. So you can see that Lorsban and 2 applications of the nematode, one in the fall and one in the spring, had significantly reduced the population. We compared this to Asana, and unfortunately Asana didn't work very well for peach tree borer. So again, even in our New Jersey soils down in the south, it looks without the fire gel for peach tree borer, it looks like that the nematodes might be a good option as well. So for the nematode component, we can conclude that if you're targeting lesser peach tree borer, you most likely need to incorporate some sort of gel to increase the survivability of the nematodes, such as Barricade. And I think it only costs about $5 to incorporate the gel. If you're targeting peach tree borer, you can do a fall application, and we may not need to incorporate any of the gels, just look at the nematodes. But the important thing is that the nematodes and the mating disruption are getting equal management of these borer pests to Lorsban. So we have some other options to consider. They just may be a little bit outside of our normal toolbox. But they're going to be better for the safety of our workers and safety of the farm overall going forward. For dogwood borer, some studies looked at a sail to see if we could use a sail to control dogwood borer. This did an application right at first moth emergence and then 2 to 3 weeks later. And this was done in Michigan, I believe. So here we have the number. It's a very messy slide, I apologize. But basically, the important thing here is that comparing a sail to Lorsban to water, a sail did not work as well as Lorsban, but it did suppress the population a little bit. So if you have no other alternatives, the sail might be an option here. Some work up in New York has looked at dogwood borer mating disruption as well as in Michigan. When we look at dogwood borer mating disruption, again, we're using the isomate dogwood borer ties at the rates of 100 to 150 ties per acre, so a little lower than our peach tree borers. And what we can see is that the mating disruption was not as good as the chlorpyrifos treatment, but it was better than doing nothing at all. And the similar results were done in studies in Michigan. So I recently came back from Italy. I was invited to go out and give a talk about brown marmorated stink bug in Italy because they're experiencing some pretty severe issues there. And since we were talking about chlorpyrifos, this actually ties in, surprisingly. So they are seeing a lot of injury to pears. Pears are their primary crop where I was, in the Emilia-Romagna region in central Italy. They do have peach production as well, but pears are their #1 crop. And their BMSB populations have spread kind of like wildfire over there, similar to what we saw very early on, except that they don't have the same chemistries that we have to control it. And they're getting severe damage, and their farmers are really scared. I don't speak Italian, but I did go and talk to a couple of them. Well, I listened, and they were very frustrated. They didn't know what to do. Their farming situation is a lot different than ours. They have, like on our small, we were talking about plot sizes and farm sizes. Their average farm's about 5 acres. So they'll have a 5-acre stand of pears, and that's the farm. So they have much larger numbers of growers in a small area, but much smaller farm sizes. And their landscape's a little different, a lot of walnut trees in the sides. But they're very concerned about this pest. As most of you know, it can cause significant injury. So I kept asking them, what are they doing? So it's pear, and they don't want to use pyrethroids because pear scilla. Pear scilla is their #1 pest, and they've found If they use pyrethroids, they're going to knock down those natural enemies, and then they get outbreaks of parasilla. So pyrethroids are pretty much off the table, and of course, we primarily use pyrethroids to control stink bug. So anybody here speak Italian? Read Italian? So I think I remember what this says. So in pairs, they said, what are they going to use? And these are their options. This is what they're recommending for this year. What's this? Chlorpyrifos. 5 times. 5 applications of chlorpyrifos during the growing season. 2 applications of acetamiprid and 1 application of edofemprox or fipronil. So their chemical options are much different than ours. I would say ours are much safer, considering we're not allowed to use chlorpyrifos or lorsban during the growing season at all due to worker safety and environmental concerns. And in fact, last year, they had about 12 people that after they told all the growers to spray on the same day, and 12 people went to the hospital from all the lorsban fumes in the air. So hopefully they can get some permission to use some better chemistries. But this is something that I think is really interesting. I don't know if it's practical for us, but I just think from a horticultural standpoint and from an entomological standpoint, it was really cool. They have about 5 periods where they're really sensitive to hail, and they have this structure here already in place. Let's see, can you guys see that? There's all these, they're basically high density pairs, and they're all trellised with wire, and they have hail netting over almost about 50–60% of their pear production in the Emilia-Romagna region. And so this is the hail netting down. They put it down, it's a permanent structure, and it's of course paid for 50% by their grower organization, which is supplemented through government funds. But it costs them about $1,000 per year, per hectare, because it lasts 10 to 15 years. So they put this down post-bloom, and they're like, will this work for BMSB? And I said, well, I don't know. We don't have this netting. It's about 2.2 millimeters by 5.4 millimeters. If you look at it, it would definitely exclude the adults and the larger nymphs, but the younger ones would definitely be able to get in there. So they did a little bit of testing over there in the lab. Here's the hail netting down. Here's some of the native stink bugs, Nazara, the green stink bug. We get a little bit of this in our orchards. So you can see the size of this netting in relation to the bugs. So the adults definitely can't get in, but some of the smaller ones can squeeze through. And when they did this in the lab, the 5th instars and the adult Haliomorpha, or BMSB, were excluded. So they obviously didn't have a control here, but you can see here that under orchards that had the netting, they had 3 to 9% injury from stink bugs. You can't distinguish stink bug species. Whereas when they didn't have the damage with the net and they were still using insecticides, they had anywhere from 10 to 50% damage. So those hail nettings are serving a dual purpose for them, and hopefully can get them away from some of those lorsban treatments during the season. So I just wanted to share that with you because I thought it was interesting in terms of kind of contrasting what we're going through with removal of lorsban and what they're going through with a new pest that we have experience with, but we have a different set of tools for it. So I'm done. So what we know now is that we'll keep you up to date on the status of lorsban going forward, but please start thinking about these alternatives. Does anybody currently use mating disruption for borers here? Okay, there's some. So, we're using it down at the research station as well, and we need to start thinking about alternative tactics. If you're interested in the nematodes, contact me. I can give you a lot more information and maybe even give you some, we can maybe do some trials together.